been 3 months since the last time I made an entire tier list for every commander in Rise of Kingdoms, and this is probably one of the most interesting 3-month periods in Rise of Kingdoms when it comes to meta changes, because as you guys know, the man, the myth, the legend himself, Emperor Qin, came into the game and kind of changed everything. On top of that, we also got 2 new season 2 ranged commanders, and we also saw the implementation of new KvK crystal technology. So what I'm trying to say is this video is long overdue. We got to talk about what is the current meta today in Rise of Kingdoms when it comes to the best possible commanders. So let's jump right into it, but first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, as you guys know, I am a partnered creator with Rise of Kingdoms, which means they support a few videos on the channel every single month, just like this one, but the most important support comes from you guys dropping a thumbs up down below and subscribing, because we are so close to 90,000 subscribers. Now, with all that out of the way, let's jump right in, and what you're looking at right here is the outdated tier list. This tier list was from back at the end of April of 2025, so we're going to be making adjustments to this tier list so you guys can see how I kind of feel about the current commanders and where they go, in my opinion, in this tier list. Now, just to give you guys a couple of disclaimers here, okay? First of all, this is not an investment tier list, okay? So don't look at S plus and S tier and say, I'm just going to get those commanders. That might not necessarily be the best strategy for you, unless you have literally 1400 sculptures ready to dump in commanders today all at once. I'll make a separate investment guide in the next couple of days or weeks, but this is just sort of my rough interpretation of each commander's power level in this snapshot moment in time right now today in Rise of Kingdoms. Second of all, let me go ahead and define the tiers for you. Okay, the S plus tier is more or less the best commanders in their class. So typically, if you're going to build one commander pairing of a troop type, typically those commanders will land in the S plus because they are the best of their troop type, and therefore almost everybody should be using them in a 3, 4, or 5 army lineup. The S tier are commanders that are adjacent to that, and they can sort of hang with the big boys, and they typically will find themselves in either the first or second pairing of a given troop type. The A tier, as logic would dictate, would be commanders that typically would land in your third army of a given troop type. The B tier are commanders that are just a little bit less powerful than that, so maybe if you don't have sculptures to invest in another commander for a third army, maybe you can sort of sub in one of those commanders. But really, the B tier is where you start to see commanders that really aren't used that much in the open field anymore. C tier are commanders that are just a step below that in power level, so maybe they're stronger in the early game and they just don't really make the cut later. D tier are commanders that you just absolutely never see in the open field in the end game. They're just way too bad. And then F tier is just the absolute worst open field commanders in the game. The third distinction that I should be making here is that this tier list is for open field PvP, so this is not going to cover rally garrison meta. Okay, this is strictly open field PvP, because that is what I do. I'm not a garrison leader, I'm not a rally leader, I'm an open field fighter, so this is what we're going to be covering here. Okay, now with all of that out of the way, let's jump right in and let's actually adjust the old tier list. So let's go ahead and bump down some commanders that I feel like are ranked too highly in the old tier list for today's meta. First things first, there's a couple of commanders in B tier that I'd like to move down here. Okay, Chandragupta, I'm sorry, you're coming down. We're also going to pull down Thutmose. We're also going to pull down Pyrrhus. We're going to pull down Ramses as well. I know that doesn't make that much of a difference, right? You're not using them in B tier, you're certainly not going to be using them in C tier, but I just wanted to make a little bit of a distinction here, because when you look at, like, obviously Bertrand and Shook got their upgrades when they moved back to season 2, upgrades I would say, but like just the stats and the damage output here just don't really move the needle that much. I guess that most technically has a lot of stats, so you might be able to make the argument there, but really, like, these commanders, just I would say sinking them slowly to the bottom of the list, it makes a little bit of sense. I also want to move Trajan down to B tier. I haven't seen a Trajan in the open field in quite a while. It just, not that he's useless, but it's just like, if you're using him, you've built your account around an open field leadership army. Most people are not doing that, so I don't know, I feel like we've power crept damage so much in the game that it just becomes harder and harder and harder to justify full support marches. At least that's my opinion. So I'm gonna bump down Trajan a little bit. I know it feels weird to have him in some of the company that you see here, but like realistically, you just don't see him. I'm gonna bump down Guan Yu, I'm gonna bump down Nevsky, and then I'm also going to pull Hua down as well, and also I'm gonna pull down Herman Prime. And from here, we're gonna make more adjustments to this tier list in a moment, but at this point I think we should start to add some of the new commanders into the list. Okay, because from here, like, it's hard to justify some of the further movements that I'm going to make without you guys understanding the concept of it, right? I've already made a video in the last couple of weeks about Hua and why he is basically the last single target damage commander in a 5 army lineup right now, and it just, I mean, he just does not deserve to be an S plus. Of course, Herman Prime, of course, is fantastic still, but we'll talk a little bit more about why I'm bumping him down in a minute, and I'm going to make some adjustments to the S plus here as well, so don't jump the gun with your comments. All right, just stay tuned. All right, so let's start with Shapur, right? He is the latest mightiest governor commander for archers, and if we look at his kit for open field use, it is additional damage over time, which historically is not great, right? You really just want to deal as much damage as possible all in one run. It is 3,200 damage though if you can stick to it, and there's a little bit of an effect here, but it's really nothing crazy. So a lot of single target damage, but it's dealt over time. We don't love that. Great march speed and decent health for a open field archer, a chance to gain attack, which we don't love, and then a rally conditional here, which we don't care about for open field. For this, you have a chance to have very specific negative effects to the target and cause them to deal less normal damage. This skill was mainly used to counter smite garrisons, and so in the open field, like, does this do stuff? Yes, but barely, so it's not that relevant. I mean, the 20% normal damage reduction is nice, but it's only a 20% chance of that whenever you deal skill damage, and it's also to one target, right, as a debuff. So I don't know, it's something, but it's not great. Here we have a rally skill, and then here we have half of this is for rally, the other half is you have a 15% chance to deal additional 200 damage factor for 2 seconds to one enemy. Really, there's not that much stats here. There's decent march speed, single target damage, single target debuff. Really, that doesn't shape up very nicely for an open field use. So where does he find himself on the tier list? Well, he's going to find himself pretty much alongside the other commanders that do similar things, like Subutai. Subutai is a good example. Same thing with Scipio Emilianus. They deal lots of single target damage, but really they're rally commanders. They don't have a ton of stats for open field use, and so, like, technically, yes, they will deal a lot of damage, but actually you shouldn't really be using them for open field. I think that's an open and shut case. Next, let's just get Archimedes and Mary out of the way. These are the two new season 2 legendary ranged commanders, right? And one of the things about these commanders is that if you look at their stats compared to other ranged, you look at their damage output compared to other ranged, they are clearly a slight cut below the other ranged, even if you are able to kind of fit them into pairings somehow. Like, if you wanted to run like 4 ranged marches or something, like, you're gonna find a spot for them, right? I'm not saying there's not synergy there, but, like, I mean, you just one look at the kit and you could tell that they're built for season 2. Like, they are actually season 2 commanders, and so they're gonna find themselves amongst other season 2 commanders. So they are definitely, from what I can tell, a cut below some of the other ranged marches, so we're gonna drop them in the B tier. Okay, that's where they're gonna go for now. If there's something changes in the meta and they just somehow become insane, like, for example, because they're season 2, they are probably going to get a museum relic at some point. If that's the case and they gain a tremendous amount of stats, then of course I'll probably bump them up for the next version of this tier list. And let me just give you guys a little bit of a prediction here. Okay, it could be the case, right? Like, and recently I made a video talking about what the next set of commanders is going to be, right? And I said that it's either going to be another ranged with leadership release, because that's what's technically scheduled next, or they're going to skip that and go directly to calves because we just got 2 new ranged commanders, right? And I think what they could do is, if they skip the next sort of ranged release, they could just go right to calves, and then when those cav commanders come out, then they give a crazy museum relic to these 2 commanders, which effectively could make them Season of Conquest viable, right? I think that would be fantastic. I think that would be a nice middle ground, so that way ranged players still technically get new ranged toys to play with in Season of Conquest that have a respectable amount of stats or damage output or whatever, but they don't have to, like, do back-to-back ranged releases, right? So I suspect we will get some sort of museum relic for them in the future, and if the museum relics are broken, maybe they will be moved up into the next tier, but for right now I'm dropping them in the solid B tier, middle of the pack, because we do have some other, you know, season 2 commanders in here as well, but they do also enjoy the benefits of ranged marches, right? They're dealing damage without taking it back, which is why they're ahead of some of the other season 2 commanders like Cyrus, who have to be on the front lines and thus suffer the consequences as such. Next we have Emperor Qin, and Emperor Qin has been a very interesting release for Rise of Kingdoms because he has sort of fundamentally signaled a shift in the open field meta, right? He's clearly a cut above all of the other archer commanders in the game. He is casting his active skill in a very unique way. He causes the secondary commander to thus cast very frequently, every like 4 5 6 seconds, which is insane. His damage output is through the roof, and I think this is for multiple reasons, but primarily because archers really needed something busted now that they are going and kind of solidified themselves as the skill damage route, right? So with that being said, clearly Emperor Qin goes at the top of S plus, but that's kind of not where this ends, right? Really, like if you look at S plus, does this lineup make any sense? The answer is no, right? Because if you know how good Emperor Qin is, it doesn't make sense to have him in the same category as commanders like Scipio, right? Like Scipio is fantastic, but Emperor Qin is strictly a cut above, right? And I strongly considered making a new tier above S plus and just calling it S plus plus or something, but then I started to think like that kind of sets a weird precedent, and I don't like the idea of that based on how the rest of the list is built here. And also, like, we are always going to have new commanders, like there's always been power creep. So while Emperor Qin is clearly a cut above the rest of the commanders, I don't know, I don't think I need to add another tier above S plus to get my point across. And so what I've decided to do instead is crush down F and D tier together, because effectively, you know, with the high end of the tier list moving up so dramatically with Emperor Qin coming into the game, it just kind of shrinks the bottom of the list, so that way it's like the distinction between D and F tier at this point is almost negligible, right? Like they, yes, technically, if we're looking at, you know, Freddy, or we're looking at El Cid, technically will they output more damage than somebody like Sunduk? Yes, of course they will, right? Of course they will. So does it make sense for them to be in the same tier? Not really, but like when you really understand open field fighting in Rise of Kingdoms, like you will effectively have the same outcome whether you're using Freddy, El Cid, Ethelfled, or like a random gatherer, right? Now again, are they the same? No, they are technically better, of course, right? But in the grand scheme of things, what I'm trying to say is that you shouldn't be using D tier commanders, and therefore you also shouldn't be using F tier commanders, so why not just combine, right? Like that's really my sort of logic here. And in this way we can sort of crunch down the bottom of the list rather than add something at the top of the list, because again, I just don't want to, because you know, what if a year from now there's something that outputs twice as much damage as Emperor Qin? Do I have to add another tier at the top of the list, right? Like then we're going to be S plus 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 plus. I don't want to do that to myself, right? So I think it makes more sense to just squish down the bottom of the list. And so yes, technically that's going to mean that some of these commanders maybe don't necessarily belong in the same tier. Obviously Sun Tzu is a cut above an epic gathering commander, right? Like clearly, but at the end of the day, if we're talking about end game PvP outcomes, I think that all of these commanders being in the same tier makes sense from a, you know, just a battle perspective, right? I hope you guys can sort of understand where I'm coming from and where the logic is in that, and also where the logic is in that not wanting to add a whole nother tier above everything, right? Hopefully that makes sense. I almost wanted to just take all of these commanders at the bottom and just cut them off the list and be like, yeah, don't even consider them. And maybe that's like what I should do instead, right? So that way they're not technically mixed together, but in the same vein as that, it's kind of the same thing, right? Like you just don't use them. So with that being said, let's move down a bunch of commanders here, because this is also going to give us a little bit more wiggle room at the top of the list to make some really important distinctions. Okay, by the way, the only reason Julius Caesar doesn't find himself in F tier, when like really he kind of should find himself there, his recent relic does give him even more all damage, and I feel like it's just like, can I really put a commander with 25% all damage and 20% march speed in the same category as gathering commanders? I don't know. I know Ragnar just got his skill too. I'm gonna put him in D. I mean, again, we're in the same situation where like even these commanders in D tier, you still shouldn't be using them, even though they were just in C tier a moment ago. Okay, so now we've made a lot of room in the list by crunching down D and F together into the F tier, and we've moved down C to D and B to C. So now we can start to distinguish between the S plus, S and A's, because as you can see, the A tier is pretty stacked, and I don't think that it's fair to put a commander like Margaret or a commander like Mehmed in the same tier as somebody like William Wallace or Guan Yu, right? Like it just doesn't make any sense to me. So what we're going to do is sort of more define the A tier by moving some things down. So first of all, Boudica Prime comes down. She's a single target damage commander. Same thing with Tariq, same thing with Justinian. Mehmed just got another relic buff, but at the same time, I just don't think that he can really cut it in the A tier these days. I'm also going to pull down commanders like Zhang Yu. We're going to pull down commanders like Belisarius Prime, unfortunately unfortunately for him, he is a single target damage commander who is very niche, by the way. But remember, this is an open field tier list. We're not talking about swarming flags and forts and all that other stuff. We're talking about open field PvP. I don't think you're going to find a Belisarius Prime in the 3 army cav lineup. I'm also going to pull down Nebu, and I'm going to pull down Margaret as well. I just feel like with Nebu, you know, he's definitely outclassed at this point, and so he's coming down. Margaret can still be used, of course, with Gonzalo, but you know, are you going to be using Margaret in a 2 army lineup for ranged? Maybe, but it's probably not. I mean, you're probably going to be running Yajimata with Gonzalo and then John and Steven together, right? At least that's how I typically see people run 2 ranged. You can let me know down below if that's not right. The last change I'm going to make here is I'm actually going to bring down Guan Yu as well. I'm really torn about this because, you know, on one hand, if you think about a 3 army lineup for infantry, are you running Guan? No, you're not, right? It's been a while since you've ran Guan in that regard. But if you compare him to somebody like Nevsky, like, is he going to output more damage than Nevsky? For sure, right? I mean, a 3 target 2000, of course he's going to deal more damage than Nevsky. But by the nature of where calves and their meta are, like, you're more likely to use Nevsky than you are to use Guan, if that makes sense, right? So even though, like, point for point, I would argue that Guan is outputting more damage than Nevsky. I mean, just logically, AoE is like always outputting more damage, right? Plus he's got the silence, which is insane, whereas the defense debuff on Nevsky's a single target. But realistically, you know, this is kind of apples to oranges, and commanders don't exist in a vacuum. You're not ever going to be using just one single commander versus just one single other commander. So from that perspective, I'm bumping Guan down, and I really want to bump down Nevsky, but I feel like I can't do that until there is another cavalry commander to sort of take his place. Okay, so now that we've sort of cleaned up the A tier, let's clean up the S and S plus tier, because we need to start to make some more distinctions here. And I think let's use this logic. Okay, if you're running 2 cavalry armies, are you using Hua? Yes, you are. If you're running 2 archer marches, are you using Herman? Yes. If you're running 2 calves, are you running Joan? Yes. If you're running 2 archers, are you using YSG? Probably. Are you using Ashurbanipal though? Probably not, right? I mean, think about it. You're going to be running most likely Emperor Qin with YSG, and then you're going to be running Zhuge Liang with Herman, and so Ashurbanipal gets the boot down to A tier. Gonzalo stays in S because he is still the single best ranged commander in the game. William, are you going to use William in a 2 army lineup for calves? No, you're not. And when it comes to a 2 army lineup for any troop type, does Philip find himself in any of them? Well, the answer is yes. Technically, he would find himself in a 2 cav army lineup right now, but I really hate having him in S. I really do. The beauty of Philip is his versatility, right? So when you talk about maybe an investment tier list, Philip can find himself pretty high on that list. When it comes to open field performance, again, I feel like people are pairing him with King Arthur purely as a technicality. Like, we don't have another combo. Well, sorry, Bertrand. We don't have another like really good combo commander for the open field that's worth investing in right now. And so that's where Philip finds himself, right? Just in the same way that a lot of times you would find Philip behind Zhuge Liang, there's enough synergy, and Philip was okay enough to fill that gap. He's really a gap filler in your lineup, is what I'm trying to say. And so does a gap filler find himself in S tier? Well, let's think about this logically. Okay, his active skill, very strong, but because it's only 2 seconds, it's actually not as good as it looks. It looks fantastic on paper, but really it doesn't move the needle as much as people think. If we look at, in this case, we're arguing as part of the cav lineup, 35% attack is more valuable now than it was before. But when it comes to like, is that fantastic? I mean, I don't know. Let's think about Arthur has 50% of stats. Hua has 75% of stats between attack and defense. Emperor Qin has 50% of stats. Ragnar has 40% of stats, plus he steals some health. Bai Qi has 50% of stats. So if we compare him to other commanders in the S tier, yeah, he's got less stats than Hua, but he's got almost as much stats as somebody like Herman Prime, YSG, whatever. So from a stats perspective, he finds himself here. From an active skill perspective, he does not, but he does have 30% all damage. Really, his damage comes from that plus the instant proc, and the only other instant proc commander we see finds himself in A tier. And it's worth noting that Alex does have more stats than Philip. I'm gonna bump him down to A tier, and here's why. The reason is because we're gonna be bumping down Ragnar Prime and CPO Prime, because as I just said, if you're running 1 infantry march, you're not running either Ragnar nor CPO Prime, so they just simply do not belong in S plus, even though they are very good. I think I've only used them for two 2 maybe 3 kvks at this point, and they're extremely consistent. They are definitely more tanky than lots of other things in the field, but they're still outputting a respectable amount of damage, and you've got some debuffs across the two of them. Their biggest downside is that Ragnar Prime is a little slow, which is true, but he more than offsets that by having really high damage output. As a total package, they're just really tanky and really good, especially when you consider you're taking less skill damage on Ragnar, and you have a chance to reduce skill damage as well on CPO. And right now, with the amount of skill damage that is being dealt by Emperor Qin, having two commanders in this pairing with skill damage taken reduction is very good. So I really love this commander pairing a lot, and so it really sucks to have them not be an S plus, but at the end of the day they are not in the single best infantry march in the game, and so they have to be an S tier. And furthermore, when we look at the future of infantry, it's pretty clear that it's mostly going to be smite commanders, and so I think you can justify having Bai Qi and Liu Che in the S plus tier, whereas you can't justify having these here as well. And this is another reason why Philip is an A tier, right? Because he's got less stats than a lot of these guys, and because his active skill's not as strong as a lot of these guys. Yeah, he has 30% all damage, but Caesar's got 25. So like, what are we talking about? Like, my point is, like, I just don't think he's on the same tier as the commanders that are in S tier right now, and so that's why he goes in A right now. Should Emperor Qin get his own tier like above everybody else? Yes, probably. But I think just to keep things simple, you know, I'm gonna do something like this. I think this is, man, I mean, honestly, Zhuge Liang, the synergy is so good that you really could put him above the others, but like, yeah, I don't know. I think it's kind of impossible like to speculate the order of the S plus tier. The only things set in stone in my mind are that Emperor Qin is at the top of the S plus tier and Bai Qi is at the bottom of the S plus tier. If Liu Che didn't have his expertise with the combo damage, he would be at the bottom of S tier, but he does, so that's no point in speculating that. But yeah, I think this is gonna do it for the tier list. Oh, I'm gonna do this actually. I'm gonna do, yeah, I think that's kind of where we're sitting here with the tier list. I think that's probably roughly what I would say. I'm actually gonna bump Shajar down a little bit here. Right now, the single best commander in the game is Emperor Qin. Of course, you knew it, I knew it, everyone knows it, but I just wanted to make this distinction where we kind of have to update the rest of the tier list as a result of his massive jump in power. And so this is kind of how I'm feeling about the current meta in Rise of Kingdoms. You know, the more that I think about this, okay, because I'm so indecisive about this, I'm actually going to put Philip at the bottom of S, and here's why. I stand by everything that I just said. The only reason why I'm doing this is because with the next cav release, I could be wrong in that obviously you're going to pair that new cav with King Arthur, but my knee-jerk reaction was that you're going to be running Hua with Joan as your second, but it could be the case with the new crystal tech that you could run Philip Joan, and if you max out the tech for calves, maybe it's got just enough tankiness to be a thing. I'm really hesitant about this commander pairing because it is quite literally a glass cannon. Like, there's just, Joan has like what, 10% health or something, and that's it. Like, there's just absolutely no tankiness there at all. You, as soon as you're targeted, you're dead. But like, it's kind of like a high risk high reward march. But I personally have not played with the new crystal tech yet, so I mean, maybe it's possible that people could pull that off. So in the event that with the next cav release we do see Hua bump down to A, I don't know, I'm gonna just leave Philip here just because he's hanging by a thread. Really, he's hanging by a thread. All right, guys, that's gonna do it. Before I change my mind again, we're gonna just wrap it up here. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. I think that is completely fair. I'm being extremely generous to Philip here, but I think that, you know, just because I can't predict the future, I'm gonna leave him in S tier just because I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But guys, if you made it to the end of the video, drop a thumbs up on it. It really helps out the channel a ton. It helps get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it. And while you're down there, consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. And comment down below your thoughts on the tier list. What do you guys think about the current state of the tier list in Rise of Kingdoms? Do you agree with this? You completely disagree? I'm sure you guys will drop your comments down below regardless. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.